everyone. Welcome to the second part of our webinar series on building a resilient strategy for 2019. I'm Vishrita, and with me I have Siddharth, our cybersecurity expert. Although businesses around the world are at the cusp of digital transformation, progressing towards newer operating models, it's amidst looming threats of privacy and security concerns. Adopting better technology, data analytics tools, and digitalization is in turn increasing the digital links an employee has with his or her organization. This whole process is very likely to intensify the kind of masked cyber risk an organization is exposed to, as attackers themselves are becoming equally technologically advanced and sophisticated in their execution. Traditionally, companies have chosen to pick either the proactive or the reactive approach towards cyber attacks. But moving forward, it has become imperative to have a strategy that has place for both the approaches. Though it's really important to create a highly secure network that attackers wouldn't want to infest, given the number of attacks and the kind of money that's being pumped into the rectification of them, it becomes equally critical to be equipped to detect and mitigate these attacks as they happen. Before we jump into today's agenda of reactive measures and SIEM best practices, here's a small recap to the Unified Endpoint Management and Privileged Identity Management session webinar that we had earlier this week. So we talked about cyber attacks that had happened in 2018 and what we can expect in 2019. We talked about the complex device applications, cloud security challenges, and the evolving user challenges. We talked about how UEM can make a difference in tackling data breaches, UEM best practices, an overview of an insider attack, key findings on the insider attacks, and capabilities that a perfect PIM solution should have. We will anyway be mailing you the presentation decks and the links to the recordings of the previous webinar for your reference. Also, please do give us your valuable feedback regarding the webinar series as you download the resource bundle mailed to you post this webinar session. That being said, now I hand over the control to Siddharth, our cybersecurity expert, to take you through everything from reactive spectrum that you need to keep in mind while framing your cybersecurity strategy for 2019.
Thank you, Vishrita. Good afternoon, everyone. Once again, thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Siddharth, and I work for the Log 360 product team at ManageEngine, and I'm going to be your presenter for today's session. So here's what we've got planned for today, right? So in the first part, we had a look at some of the preventive measures that we can implement for cybersecurity. And what we're going to be focusing on today is how we can bring in security monitoring technology to be able to detect and respond to security incidents, right? So I'll start off by talking about what the scenario is in today's IT security landscape. This is more particularly from a security incident and response point of view, right? So the technology that we're going to be dealing with in today's webinar has been around for a long time, right? SIEM or SIEM or log management or whatever you want to call it. And we're going to be looking at why, despite this technology being there for 10, 15 years, we're going to look at why this is still a crucial component in your security arsenal, right? We look at the evolution of SIEM in terms of what kinds of features and what kinds of attacks you can actually mitigate by using a SIEM tool, right? I also want to give you a knowledge share over the course of the webinar by giving you best practices, right, for your security auditing, your reporting and alerting, and what kinds of reports and alerts you'd like to set up. We'll also look at a lot of use cases over this session, right? I want to give a lot of examples, really give you insights into what kinds of security risks you can mitigate using a SIEM tool, right? And then we'll talk about insider threats because this is something that is a huge concern today. We did touch upon this in part 1 of the webinar series, but in the context of today's webinar, we'll be looking at tracking insider threats from a monitoring point of view, right? In terms of how we can actually do a real-time monitoring, implement this real-time monitoring to detect insider threats, right? We'll also look at how we can respond once we detect, right? So the first part of the webinar of today's webinar is going to be about being able to quickly detect attacks. And then in the end, we look at how we can actually respond, right? That's what you want. You want to detect, and then you want to respond. And we'll also, over the course of the webinar, look at some of the latest trends in SIEM, right? Both in terms of what the market is expecting, what our own customers are looking at when they evaluate the solutions, and also what the leaders in the SIEM industry are developing, right? Because like I said, this is a technology that's been around for 10 or 15 years with so many different names. But even today, it is still a very relevant $2 billion market. Right? So we look at what kinds of technologies, how developments in other fields of computer science are actually influencing the development of modern day SIEM solutions, and why it is important in today's cybersecurity scenario for you to implement these technologies. Right, so let's have a look at the challenges faced by security teams and security operations centers when it comes to monitoring. Right, and we have to start off by talking about the cloud, and this is something that we spoke about in the first webinar. This is something that you'd hear if you go to any CIO address or any security event. Any webinar is going to talk about the cloud today. And from a monitoring point of view, cloud adoption has caused a whole bunch of challenges, right? Because back in the day, if you've been around in the industry for more than 10 or 15 years, you would know how your networks in your corporate networks have evolved, right? Because maybe 10 years ago, it was very easy to do basic security monitoring, right? Because you had a few on-premise servers, you'd have your network devices, you'd have your domain controllers, your SQL servers, and things like that. And you sort of have complete visibility into what's happening on those systems, right? But today you have a whole bunch of new scenarios. You might have an employee who works from home, right? They may not connect directly to the corporate network. They may be using cloud applications. They may use Office 365, AWS, Azure. And then there's so much of, there is a loss really in visibility when they move to these cloud platforms, right? What if, for example, one of your employees is using Salesforce CRM and is a disgruntled employee who just exports customer data, copies it to his USB stick, and quits the company, right? So these kind of challenges are there today, and it becomes really difficult for you as a security administrator to understand and know exactly what actions your users are performing in these cloud environments, right? You may have a situation where your employees are traveling around the globe. They may connect to a compromised Wi-Fi network at a coffee shop and end up infecting their machine, right? And potentially when they connect back to the corporate network, that infection can spread through your network, right? So these are the kinds of monitoring challenges that we are facing today because we no longer have full visibility into what's happening with our users and their machines. So this is something to keep in mind. We look at how we can tackle this. And then, of course, you've got cutting edge attacks. We've got a whole bunch of new attacks, new ransomware, which is really using evolved techniques to infect and spread through networks, right? So if you take, for example, a lot of ransomware attacks that we saw last year, they have evolved so much to be able to, say, access Windows Credential Manager, find out other IP addresses in the network that they can infect. And they're able to, they've evolved as much as security technology has evolved, right? You've got ransomware as a service, something that a lot of us talk about today. This is another problem that you have to deal with. Attacks itself has become an industry. Criminals can actually purchase these attack starter kits just as how you look to purchase security solutions, right? So this is a big problem. And then you've got internal threats. Again, we keep hearing a whole bunch of statistics. I think last year it was nearly 1 in 3 attacks were insider attacks, right? So think about that. We've spent so much time and money in securing our network perimeter, but most of the time, threats stem from the inside, right? This could be a naive user or an administrator who changed something without realizing, or it could be someone who had malicious intent. But the point is, 1 in 3 cyber attacks start from within your organization, right? So it becomes really important to really track what your users are doing, what actions they're doing on your network and on your servers and their own workstations. And then you've got IoT, right? Everything is connected today. The attack surface has become so much larger for any cyber criminal, right? Because it's no longer that they have just a few point of entries to your network, but rather now they can look at infecting all the different devices that are connected to the internet and use that as an access point to get into your network, right? So the attack surface has become really large. So that, with the fact that you've got insider threats, with the fact that you've got more advanced attack techniques, and with the fact that you cannot monitor your users as easily as before, means that you've got a whole bunch of challenges to tackle, right? And to add to all of this, you've got new data protection regulations. So you've got things like the GDPR in Europe, and today we've got a lot of people coming in from Australia. And there you guys have got the notifiable data breaches scheme, right? Which makes it mandatory to report data breaches to the authorities. So all of these things are what security teams have to deal with today. And so let's look at now how we can approach the problem. Right? So we know there are a bunch of challenges. It may seem almost impossible to be able to stay on top of all of these challenges that we saw on the previous slide. But here's the thing. You can break down your cybersecurity approach into three major areas, right? So we saw these challenges in the previous slide, and it may seem that, okay, there are a lot of things that seem to be out of our control. But here is how you can actually approach the problem, right? Point number one, look at reducing the chance of being hit by an attack, right? Reduce the chance of being breached. Implement technical measures to be able to be secure from the point of view that attacks can't come in the first place, right? Reduce the chance of being hit by an attack. And for this, we dealt with this in the first part of the webinar, right? We looked at unified endpoint management. We looked at privileged identity management, right? So those kinds of solutions, what they do is make sure that there are no vulnerabilities, there are lesser chances of an attacker being able to breach your network, right? Preventive measures, extremely important and something that you definitely want to do. But here's the thing. If it were the case that just preventive measures were enough, you wouldn't hear about cyber attacks today, would you? Because if it was just that, oh, you have a few preventive measures in place and then nothing would happen. If that were the case, you would not read about attacks. But because you do read about a whole bunch of data breaches on a daily basis, this means that preventive solutions alone aren't going to cut it, right? You want to have that. Yes, that is your first line of defense. That may be able to stop 90 to 95% of attacks. Great. Keep all your machines updated. Make sure they're all patched. Make sure you're implementing the best practices for privileged identity management. And the next step that you want to do is implement measures to detect and respond to attacks, right? If something happens in your network, you must be in a position to know exactly what happened and be able to respond to the attack, right? This is your step number 2. And that's what we're going to be looking at in today's webinar. We're going to look at SIEM, why you need a SIEM solution to be able to detect and respond to incidents. And then there's a third thing that you want to stay on top of, which is steps to recover, right? This is worst case scenario. Even if your monitoring technology fails you, you need a backup plan in place so that you can recover from an attack, right? So I say that the only sure shot way that you can recover from any attack is if you have a backup. Right? You may have cutting edge ransomware prevention solutions in place, but the only sure shot way of recovering from an attack is if you have a reliable backup. Right? So these are the 3 areas that we want to focus on when it comes to our security strategy for 2019. Reduce the chance of being breached, implement measures for that. And then look at implementing measures to detect when things go wrong. And then be prepared for the worst and make sure you have steps to recover from an attack, right? Your backup solutions, your tools to your forensic tools, your malware disinfection tools, and all of that. Right. Now, let's look at the main thing that we want to focus on in today's webinar, and this is on detecting security incidents, right? So consider a very simple scenario that you see on the screen. John is an end user from your sales team, and John gets added to the domain admins group in Active Directory, right? So think about this. Let's not get into how this happened, right? It could be a malicious insider, it could be by mistake, right? Let's not get into that. John from the sales team gets added to domain admins in Active Directory. Do you have a problem here now? Right? Of course you do, because this would be a deviation from your security policy. This could throw open the gates to an attack potentially, right? You don't want to give John access to your domain controllers, to your schemas and all of that, right? This is a violation to your security policy, and depending on the compliance regulations that you have to deal with, this could result in non-compliance, right? I'm sure all of you agree with me on this. Now, you tell me that you may have tools in place to manage your Active Directory groups, right? And that's great. You need that. That is sort of like a preventive measure, right? You have tools to know exactly what's what in Active Directory, which users are part of a particular group, which groups a particular user is a part of. Great, you have got that in place, that's great. Now, what if a change happens, right? That is where security monitoring comes into the picture. In an ideal scenario, John is placed in his respective Active Directory groups. You've validated that, you've checked that, you've run the report on that, right? Now, you've done that at the start of the year. Now, over the course of the year, before your next audit, John's group membership may very well change. And if John is added to a group like domain admins, and then is by the time you run your yearly report at the end, if he's added back to his actual group, you wouldn't know that for several months, John had access to domain admins, right? Continuous auditing is going to be crucial for security and compliance. It's not just important that you know at a given point which group John is a part of, right? Over the course of the year, his group membership may change, and you need to stay on top of that, right? You need to know when John's group membership changes, and if he's added to a group like domain admins, that is an escalation of privileges, right? An unwarranted escalation of privileges that you need to detect and mitigate. So how do we detect this, right? How do we detect if John gets added to domain admins? Well, for that, Windows does something really neat, right? They give you the security log. And they've got a whole bunch of event IDs that help you track different security events. Right? So these are a few crucial numbers: 4728, 4732, and 4756. So these event IDs get triggered when members get added to security groups. So think about this. If you're tracking all of these event IDs, you're essentially tracking group membership changes, and you will be in a position to detect these kinds of escalations in privileges, right? So this is very crucial. I wanted to give this example because this is a very basic example, but this is something that we can all relate to, right? All of us run on Active Directory. This could happen to anybody. So this is an example really to stress upon the need to monitor your security logs, right? So if you were not convinced up until this point, I'm sure that this example would convince you, because this is scary. What we saw on the previous slide, John, a regular end user getting added to domain admins. We need to track such changes, right? So this is just a simple example. But here is why you actually need the audit trail, right? There are a whole bunch of use cases apart from just detecting group membership changes, right? You need to be able to analyze your audit trail so that you know exactly what's going on in your network, right? At a given point, if I walk into your organization as an auditor and I ask you who's accessing and modifying your files and folders, right? Who's accessing your databases? Who's changing things on those platforms? You need to provide answers to that, right? You can't just tell them that you don't know that some data was changed. You need to know the 4 vital W's, right? The who, the when, the which, and the what, right? So this is crucial. Whole bunch of other things, user account lockouts, right? If an account gets locked out, you need to know why that happened, right? You need to investigate. Critical changes, we saw that example, critical changes to your domain controller, right? If group memberships change, if a user is moved to an OU, if changes made to your users, groups, OUs, all of those things, right? And the same thing carries forward to network devices. What if someone changes your firewall policies, right? What if someone goes and gives access to a malicious IP address to your file server, right? You also need the audit trail to track suspicious activities, right? What if someone is trying to escalate privileges on a database? What if someone is trying to carry out an attack like SQL injection, cross-site scripting, right? All of these things can happen on any network, and these are just common examples of why you need to stay on top of your security logs, right? You need to know at a given point in time, is your network secure, right? If you need to know in the last half an hour, what were the different things that happened in your network, the accesses, the modifications, the changes, any potential evolving attacks, you need to know this. And the only way to know this is if you're on top of your security logs. Right. So this brings me to the next question on what are my log sources, right? At this point, you probably agree with me that yes, I need to stay on top of my logs. So where do I get my logs from? What are the different systems I need to get logs from, right? Now, ideally, you want to get your logs from all your systems, but that may or may not be feasible depending on your bandwidth and depending on your security team's size, right? But these are a common, the machines that you see on the screen, these are a good starting point in terms of collecting logs and running reports and triggering alerts, right? Try to bring in logs from these sources. Your workstations, right? Your end user workstations are really important because that's usually where attacks start from. And we stressed upon this in part 1 when we talked about endpoint management, right? You want to get logs from your workstations. Then you've got your servers, of course. I think that's pretty straightforward. You want logs from your critical Windows or Unix servers. Your domain controllers, absolutely important, right? Very important, especially from the context of insider threats, right? You need your Active Directory logs for that. Network devices, you want to get your sys logs from your firewalls, routers, switches, your IDS, IPS systems, because these logs contain important information about traffic coming in and going out of your network. Right? At a given point, if you need to check that the traffic is legit, if you need to check that the traffic is not malicious, you need to stay on top of your network device sys logs. Right? If you've deployed endpoint security solutions, bring in those logs as well. Right? Because the more data you're able to pull into a centralized location, the better you get the network visibility, right? Because if, say for example, and we'll touch upon this again in a bit, say for example, something happens on your server, right? If you're able to associate those events with something that happened on your VPN or on your database, that really gives you the entire picture of what is going on in your network, right? So just an account lockout by itself might not tell you that an insider threat is underway, right? You need to know what else happened before and after the account lockout, right? So you need to get logs from different sources, your databases, your web servers, right? Often they are the targets for attacks. And then your public cloud platforms, right? So remember what we talked about in the beginning in terms of challenges to monitoring cloud platforms. Well, the good news is you get logs generated from those cloud applications as well, right? You've got Office 365 logs, you've got Azure and AWS logs. So bring those in as well, because those platforms see user data interactions just as much as your on-premise file servers would, right? So bring in those logs as well. This is a good starting point for starting to collect logs from different sources, right? A good basic starting point. Over and above this, yes, you may have custom applications, you may have legacy systems, and you want to bring in logs from those as well, right? But what I've listed out really is a comprehensive list of what we normally see our customers collect logs from, right? So here are 3 crucial aspects, right? Once you collect your logs, there are 3 things that you got to do, right? You want to leverage your SIEM solution to do 3 things for you, And the first is to actually run reports, right? As you all probably know, logs by themselves don't make much sense, right? And you're going to get millions of logs on a daily or weekly basis. And to actually go and sit through and review each of these logs is obviously crazy, and nobody has the time and patience to do that, right? So a SIEM solution essentially will parse these logs for you and give you the security reports that you need, right? So if you need a report on all the database accesses in the last 24 hours, your SIEM solution is going to be able to give you that based on the database logs that it collected. Right? So each time, say for example, a file access was made, right? A log gets generated for that event. And your SIEM solution is going to analyze that log and put down that information in a report, right? So from a security administrator's point of view, you don't have to waste time in reviewing logs, but rather you can look at graphical visualizations of the log data. Right? Your SIEM solution is going to do that for you, give you security audit reports to help you to review security events on a daily basis, and this is crucial for demonstrating compliance, right? Don't do the whole trying to analyze the logs using scripting techniques, copying data into an Excel sheet, doing a whole bunch of joins. All of that is not going to work today, right? Use a robust tool that can generate reports for the security events that you need. You want to know all the group membership changes? Run the report using a tool. Right? You want to know if any roles were changed on your database, if any firewall policies were changed. Run reports, right? Schedule these reports to be emailed to you on a daily basis, so that the first thing that you do as part of your security operations is you review your daily security report, right? So you can use tools that can email to you in a PDF or a CSV. You can have these reports emailed to you, so that the first thing you do, you come to work, you open these reports and check that everything is okay, right? So this is a sure shot way of knowing that nothing bad happened in the last 24 hours, right? You get your 9 a.m. report, you check all the changes, you check all the accesses, modifications, you approve it, and you know that as of that point, you are secure, right? But of course, reports by themselves are not going to solve the entire problem, right? You don't want to report the next day that says that your file servers were hit with ransomware and all files are encrypted, right? That's not going to help you. So for such critical events, you need to set up alerts, right? For file encryptions, for SQL injection, for cross-site scripting, right? So for brute force attacks, brute force login attacks. So for all of these events, you want to set up alerts. Right, so these are two very crucial aspects: having reports to periodically review security events, and having alerts to detect when things go wrong. Right, so two very important aspects that you want to focus on. Have a set of reports. I'm going to show you in the next slide 6 or 7 examples of what kinds of reports I want you to run. I'm also going to show you 6 or 7 examples of what kinds of events you want alerts for. Right, so just keep this in mind: reports and alerts. And now you want to go one step further and leverage more advanced techniques like event correlation and analytics to detect more advanced attacks. Right? So we're going to look at each of these things. I'm going to first show you reports that I want you to run on a daily basis. Right? Important reports for security and compliance. Then I'm going to show you alerts, examples of what events you want to trigger alerts for. And then I'm going to show you an actual attack scenario and show you how a SIEM solution's event correlation and analytics ability can help you track an entire attack in real time. Right, so let's get down to it. I'm just going to spend 1 minute talking about the solution we've got from ManageEngine. Right, we've got a comprehensive solution called Log360 that can do everything that we're going to discuss over the course of the webinar. I'm not going to make this a sales pitch and talk about the product, but I just wanted to introduce you to our tool because I might show you a few screenshots and jump into the tool to illustrate how an attack can be captured by a SIEM solution. Right? So Log360 essentially has a few tools integrated with it, but the two most popular ones are Event Log Analyzer and AD Audit Plus. Right? So AD Audit Plus, as the name suggests, can do a real-time auditing of your Active Directory. And Event Log Analyzer is a robust log management tool for all the other sources in your network. right? And together, we have got other components dedicated for cloud application monitoring, for Office 365 monitoring, for Exchange monitoring, and all of that. And what all of these tools together give you is complete visibility into any system in your network, right? If any system in your network can generate logs, Log 360 can process that for you, right? I'm not going to spend more time on the product. At the end of the webinar, if you have any product queries or if you'd like to schedule a demo, you can do that. But let's jump into actually giving you some practical things that you can implement right now if you haven't done already, right? So scheduling daily reports. These are a few examples of what kinds of reports we recommend you to run on a daily basis, right? This is based on our own experience at ManageEngine, our own experience of compliance regulations, right? In terms of what kinds of events regulations expect you to track, right? So for example, in your region, especially, and I know this in Australia especially, you have a mandatory data breach reporting regulation in place, right? So by running reports like these that you see on the screen, you will be able to review what's gone on in your network in the last 24 hours and know if you have to investigate into a particular incident, right? So the first thing that I recommend you to do is to segregate the events based on their severity, right? So if you've dealt with logs in the past, you know that we've got different criticality levels for log messages, right? You've got information, debug, warning, critical, right? Things like that. And you want to first segregate all the incoming events based on their severity, right? And most log management tools, including ours, can do that for you, right? Put them down into different reports based on their severity. So this immediately, at first glance, gives you an insight into if there are any security incidents that you want to closely monitor as they develop, right? That's step number one. And then you've got the privileged user activities, right? So I want you to track different actions that your privileged users do, right? What were the different changes that they made on Active Directory, on your databases, on your firewalls? All of these things, check on a daily basis. Make sure that you know exactly what your administrators are doing, right? You may or may not trust your own colleagues who are administrators, right? Not in a negative way, but rather that anyone could do something at any time, and if it goes unchecked, it could result in violations to security and compliance policies, right? And most compliance regulations expect you to track administrative actions, right? You may have internal audits where you need to furnish reports on exactly what were the different changes that administrators made over the last, say, 6 or 12 months, right? So important. This can be done very easily. These are very basic, but it's just that sometimes we don't implement these things thinking that there are more important things to do, right? But if you can get this out of the way, you really have a clear-cut security monitoring policy in place where you can check and review security events on a daily basis, right? Monitor firewall traffic. Check what are the connections that are being allowed or denied by your firewall, right? Check if your firewall is repeatedly denying connections to a particular IP address, because that a lot of the time is a case of someone trying to breach your servers, right? Review login activity. Check who's logging into which machines. Is someone having repeated failed logons? Is someone trying to carry out a brute force attack, for example, right? Check all the logons to your databases, domain controllers, even your end user workstations. And then you want to review file folder activity, right? We touched upon this already. You need to know the who, the when, the which, and the what when it comes to accesses and modifications, right? Who is accessing a particular object? Which object is being accessed? What the change is and when the change happened, right? Stay on top of the 4 vital W's for your data, the systems that store data, right? Your file servers and databases. Then I want you to review web server activity, right? All the errors that are being thrown up on your web server. If there are any attacks happening on your web server, such as cross-site scripting, right? Check which pages are being accessed, which IP addresses are accessing your web server. What kinds of requests are you getting? Are any requests malicious? Right? So all of these things can be tracked easily by running reports. And then finally, I'm highlighting configuration changes as a separate point because these are very critical. Even a small configuration change can potentially jeopardize your security policy. Right? So stay on top of those as well. Keep tracking changes on a daily basis. Right, so I just have a screenshot to just show you what I mean when it comes to running reports. Right, so if you look at this report, it says all file and folder changes, and you essentially are able to track folders and files that are deleted, renamed, moved, modified, and created. Right, so you can run this on a daily basis, have these emailed to you, right, and over time you can have these scheduled for a monthly or a quarterly basis. Right, so that you have the data on exactly what's happening in your network. Right, so if you're using a tool like Log360, you get granular reports as well. Right, so you can see on the left pane a whole bunch of dedicated reports for specific kinds of events, copy pastes, reads, SACL changes, right, failed attempts, summaries based on users, servers, and processes. Right, so all of these things can be easily scheduled and sent to you, right, so that you have data at your fingertips, right? And what reports do is that they give it to you in a very presentable, understandable format, right? You can see the columns: server, file folder, name, location, message, right? Imagine having to scan through millions of messages like this, right? It says user Ranjit, modified file and folder, right? All of these things, you can't read through millions of these messages. Right, so a tool, an automated log management tool, can give you this data at your fingertips. You can see there's an option that says export, right? So you can just have it as a PDF or a CSV file and email it to you on a daily basis, right? So even the fact that, for example, on one day you don't receive an email, that itself is an indicator that, okay, wait, something's not right. Did someone turn off logging? Did someone shut down the server or something like that? Right, so daily reports are that powerful. You know, it's not just a matter of being able to review what happened, but it's also an opportunity to identify if any event requires your investigation. Right, so stay on top of this. And then you've got alerts, right? So these are for events that require your immediate attention. Right, if something unauthorized happens, for example, an unauthorized modification to financial data, this is something that you need an alert for, right? If a server is being repeatedly restarted, right, that is an indicator of compromise. So what you see on the screen really are what we call IOCs, or indicators of compromise, right? These kinds of events could potentially mean that an attack is developing in your network. So it's not, I'm not going to say with 100% that these events imply an attack, but what I'm going to say is that these events at least warrant a security investigation and could well indicate that an attack is developing in your network. Right? So you want to catch it at an early stage. So if you see, for example, a malicious URL interaction, you would like to go ahead and investigate and see what actions that particular IP address is trying to perform. Right? If you see a firewall policy change, it could be legit, but there's a good chance that a firewall policy change could result in jeopardizing security, right? So track these things: account lockouts. This could be a source. This could be an indicator of an insider attack. Security group membership changes. We saw that example about a user getting added to domain admins in Active Directory, right? Track common known attack patterns, right? So for things like cross-site scripting and SQL injection, we've got a defined way that the attack happens. So why aren't we tracking it, right? So make sure you're able to enable these alerting rules in whatever SIEM solution that you're using. I'm not going to tell you, hey, you can only achieve this with ManageEngine Log360, right? But I'm saying, whatever tool you're using, try and implement these reports and alerts. Right? Because by doing so, your organization instantly becomes a whole lot secure. Right? Because you are in a position to detect attacks which couldn't be stopped with your preventive measures. Right? So like I said, once that first line of defense, once your preventive solutions fail, your second line of defense is your security monitoring, right? To be able to detect when something bad happens and quickly be able to investigate and fix the problem, right? So these are alerts. So let's go one step further and look at correlating different alerts and correlating disjointed information from different log sources and associate these events to discover more complex attacks, right? That would have been missed otherwise, right? Because if you probably know that an attack would go beyond just a account lockout, right? It would go beyond just a machine getting shut down, right? Most attacks will have a whole bunch of events happening over a period of time, and if you need to be in a position to track this entire pattern of events so that not only can you eliminate false positives, but you can also discover complex attacks, right? The best way for me to show this is by giving you an example. So I'm just going to jump into the event log analyzer component of Log360, and in fact, what you can do is you can also access this particular setup, right? So if you can go to demo.eventloganalyzer.com, right, the URL that you see on the screen, if you access this site, you can even go through this with me, right? So this is an online demo that we've got, and it's just, I wouldn't call it a fully functional demo, but it's more a good way to get a hands-on experience on seeing what a SIEM solution would look like, what kinds of reports can you run, what kinds of alerts can you set up, and how exactly you want to do that, right? So if you go to demo.eventloganalyzer.com, just click login, and you will see our SIEM dashboard, right? I'm not going to spend too much time walking you through every single tab of the product, but I want to just show you an example of an attack that was detected by our correlation engine, right? So if you just jump to the correlation tab, we've got a whole bunch of data simulated that most of our customers and evaluators use to understand what kinds of threats can be detected, right? So just look at the left pane, and we've got potential Windows threats, and under that, click on suspicious services installed. Right, so I'm going to show you an example of what the product has detected. So you can see that at this particular time, the product has triggered an alert. And if you look at the event timeline, you will see a whole bunch of events that has happened that has been detected. Right, so you can see at 1748, you can see that there is a Windows account logon failure. Right, you can see that that happens a few times, and then eventually at 1749, there is a successful logon. And at this point, this resembles a brute force attack. And then you see what happens after that. A service is installed on Windows, right? And then a service is started. Now you can tell me, how often do you actually run services on your critical Windows server, right? Does anybody do that on a daily basis? Of course not. So if something like this were to happen, if someone goes and installs a service on your Windows server and the service is started, wouldn't you want to know that? Right? Wouldn't you want to know that this has happened, because this could well be malicious? So what a SIEM tool can do is associate a whole bunch of events associated with a particular threat and give you the entire picture on what has happened in the attack. Right? And this is automated, and that's the key, because you're not defining all of these rules, right? The algorithms that are built into the correlation engine is able to detect a threat such as this one, right? You get details. You can check. For example, you can click on details, and you can see important information about that particular event, right? The source port, the event IDs, right? The domain, right? All of these things, the username. All of these things associated with this attack is right here in front of you on the screen, right? So if something bad happens and you have to investigate and worst case, you have to report the incident to the authorities, you need to provide details, right? You need to be able to tell them the time, the user accounts involved, the systems involved, the data involved, right? So all of this is going to be given to you in the correlation reports, right? So I just wanted to give you this simple example on how a SIEM solution is able to give you an alert for this entire pattern of events that you see, as opposed to giving you several individual alerts, right? You don't want an alert here, and then over the course of the attack for every single event. Like you want an alert finally when there is an actual event that you need to investigate, right? So you want to eliminate false positives. There's no point getting thousand alerts in one day from your SIEM solution, right? So your correlation is going to be extremely crucial to detect these kinds of patterns, right? I strongly recommend exploring the domain, the site that we've got, right? demo.eventloganalyzer.com. Check out all the different kinds of attacks. You can see things like cryptocurrency, right? So what we do at ManageEngine is we keep looking to develop correlation rules for the latest kinds of attacks in the market, right? So most good SIEM solutions will be able to do that, right? So we actually take inputs from people like you and build correlation rules inside the product, right? If you have a particular kind of attack or you've seen a particular kind of attack and you tell us that, we try to build that into the product, right? So what you see in our correlation rules is really a culmination of what our customers want, what kinds of attacks we see in the market, and what kind and the intelligence of our product engineering teams, right? So it's a good idea to really explore these different what you call correlation reports to understand what kinds of threats are out there and what you should be tracking, right? So even if you're using another SIEM solution, check this out and go ahead and add these kinds of correlation rules in your tool as well, right? So I'm not going to spend more time on this, on showing you the product. At any point in time, if you have any questions, you can reach out to us on the live chat, and we'll also be sending you a lot of material at the end of the webinar to help you explore more on our SIEM solution and also set up a demo with our product experts if you'd like, right? So I'm just coming towards the end of the webinar, and I just want to spend some time talking about the latest trends that we see in SIEM, right? So we looked at a few important basic aspects of SIEM, right? Being able to run reports, being able to set up alerts, and then being able to leverage advanced correlation to detect attacks, right? So this has been around. Those three aspects have been around for a while in SIEM solutions. But a lot has been added over the last few years, right? So one of the most notable things has been threat intelligence, which is to say that you can detect known malicious actors, right? So there are millions of known bad guys out there. So it makes sense to track interactions with those blacklisted domains and IP addresses, right? So this is the same thing that you would see at border control in countries. Right? So there's a list of known terrorists in the world, and essentially when you give your passport at border control, they're able to check if your passport is blacklisted, right? So why not do the same thing with IP addresses as well, right? So that there are known malicious IP addresses, and if they are trying to interact with your network, why not catch them at the firewall level itself, right? So again, your logs are going to play an important role because your logs are tracking what IP addresses are coming into your network and what IP addresses are interacting with your network, right? So by integrating threat feeds to your SIEM solution, you can correlate the IP address with the threat database and check and validate if that IP address is malicious or not, right? This is not going to help you mitigate 100% of attacks, but it sure goes a long way in blocking the known bad guys out there, right? That information is available. There are even open source threat feeds, right? So you don't even have to spend extra money in terms of procuring threat data, right? Some SIEM solutions such as ours come with built-in threat feeds, right? Which means that we've already integrated our tool with trusted threat feeds so that you can detect these known malicious actors in real time as they try to interact with your networks, Then we've got public cloud auditing. This is an area that we kept stressing upon, right? We want to monitor our cloud platforms as well. Get logs from Office 365, Azure, Exchange Online, AWS, Salesforce, and the list goes on, right? Advanced correlation rules. So you saw how powerful correlation is, right? So most SIEM vendors are continuously looking to strengthen their correlation rules, get inputs from people like you so that they can make more stronger threat detection rules, right? Another idea that we are seeing of late is security operations centers and a distributed architecture in deployment, right? So if you're a big enterprise with offices around the globe, you'd want to deploy managed servers in different locations and have a centralized admin server to aggregate information from these managed servers, right? So this kind of scalability is something that we are seeing in the industry today. And as organizations grow larger in size and have global offices, this is going to be an important point to consider while deploying a SIEM solution, right? And then we've got two more technologies. We've got UBA, or user behavior analytics, right? So this is obviously going to be very useful to detect insider threats. And we've got security integrations, right? Integrating your SIEM solution with other tools. So I'm just going to spend the last 5 minutes of today's webinar in talking about these 2 points, right? The user behavior analytics and security orchestration, because these two are sort of the need of the hour, and having these technologies as part of your SIEM solution is going to be very crucial. Right? So let's look at the first one, user behavior analytics, right? So if any of you are already using a UBA tool and are getting results out of it, reach out to us on the live chat, right? So we'd love to get your inputs on what kinds of threats you're actually able to solve, right? For those of you who are new to UBA, UBA is basically leveraging machine learning to, by itself, detect user anomalies, right? There is no configuration or alerting configuration required from your end, right? User behavior analytics leverages advancements in machine learning to be able to profile your different users, right? Say all your Active Directory users, and then detect anomalies in their behavior, right? Simple example, maybe John from your office works daily from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. and one fine day at 2 a.m. in the morning makes a remote connection to a file server and copies data, right? That's suspicious, right? I'm sure you agree with me, right? John normally wouldn't be doing that at 2 a.m., right? So user behavior analytics is able to know that this is malicious, or this is anomalous rather, right? It knows John's day-to-day activity. There is a learning period associated with UBA, right? So over a few weeks, the machine learning algorithms get trained to know how each of your users behave. And then when there is a sharp deviation in behavior, it's able to give you an alert, right? This is one really crucial component for mitigating insider attacks, right? And the best part is it's automated, right? So this is just literally using advancements in computer science and bringing it into security technology, right? So this is an area that we strongly recommend you guys to focus on, because this is an area where tools, just dedicated UBA tools, are coming out in the market, right? This is the next big thing in security, being able to monitor user activities and detect when something goes wrong, right? What if someone plugs in a USB and copies sensitive data and leaves your organization, right? So let me give you a simple example, right? And I have a few screenshots of alerts that our own SIEM solution Log360 has triggered from its UBA module, right? So you can see here that the first alert that is triggered says first time host accessed by user, right? So this is the first time that this user, Surya, is accessing a particular host, right? So that by itself is a little suspicious, right? For the first time ever that he's accessing a particular host. The next alert that the module has triggered is for unusual activity based on the time, right? The unusual activity hour. This has happened between 1 to 2 a.m. Whereas generally, Surya works from 10 a.m. to 7 p.m. Right? So this is an unusual log-on activity, right? So similar to the example that I gave you. And then what happens is that it says unusual file activity, right? So he's doing something on your file server at 1 a.m. And then it says unusual activity based on the count, right? So on a normal time, on a normal given day, Surya does 0 file server actions, but he's suddenly done 10, right? So these are all different kinds of anomalies. Anomalies that this was a first time access, unusual logon hours, and unusual count in the sense that the number of actions performed, right? So this is a very basic example that I wanted to give you in case this is a technology that you're new to, right? So Yuba is able to detect such anomalies based on its pre-built algorithms, right? So we develop these kinds of algorithms to understand a user's behavior and be able to detect when anything unusual happens, right? So this brings me to the final bit of the webinar, right? So far we've looked at several ways to quickly detect incidents, right? So imagine if you have advanced correlation and analytics, and if you have user behavior analytics in place, you're going to be able to detect both external and internal attacks in near real time, right? You're going to be able to do that really quickly. As soon as something goes wrong, these technologies are able to give you an alert, right? Once you detect it, you need to respond as well, right? Which is where streamlining your response process comes into the picture, right? So a very simple integration that you can look at is integrating your SIEM solution with your centralized ticketing tool, right? So you may be using ManageEngine Service Desk Plus or any of the other big vendors out there. So look at integrating your SIEM solution with your centralized help desk tool, right? So every incident that your SIEM solution detects using its advanced capabilities and it raises an alert, this alert can be raised as a ticket to your designated administrator, right? So this is the flowchart of what you want to optimize. Quick incident detection, which is going to be done by correlation and Yuba. The alert gets triggered by your SIEM solution, and simultaneously in real time, a ticket gets assigned to the designated administrator to respond to the alert, right? So this gives accountability in your incident response. So if you have to report events, if you have to report security attacks and breaches to your auditors, you need to show a clear process in mitigating the attack, right? An accountable process. Say that at 5 p.m. this alert got triggered on the database. At 5:02 p.m. a ticket was assigned to this particular administrator, and by 5:15 the attack was mitigated, right? So you get this entire timeline and this entire accountable process to respond to security incidents swiftly and also in a streamlined fashion, right? So what you see here is KDB, which is your knowledge database, right? So over time, you can build a knowledge database for attack mitigation in your organization, which the admin can then access to even to respond to the incident even quickly, right? If the same alert was triggered a while ago and there was a clear process in place to respond to the incident, why not just refer to what we already know, right? So really what this is doing is it's giving you more, a whole lot better response strategy, right? A much better incident response strategy. You're able to quickly detect the incident and also have a streamlined security process in place to respond, right? So your SIEM solution really can be at the heart of your security operations, and you can integrate it with several different tools so that you can manage your security operations from your SIEM solution, right? That is the idea of security orchestration. I just wanted to give you this one simple example because not only is that this is something that we do with Log360, but also this can go a long way in a timely response to security incidents, right? Because a lot of these regulations, including the one that we discussed in Australia, require that data breaches be reported at the earliest or within a stipulated time frame, right? So you need that quick detection capability and a streamlined response process, right? So this is something to keep in mind. This brings me to the end of the actual presentation, the actual presentation part of the webinar, and we are open now for answering your questions, right? So we've been getting a few questions already on the live chat, and we've been trying to answer them in real time. But if you have any questions that you'd like answers for, either about the material that was discussed in today's webinar or about ManageEngine Log360, you can shoot them out on the live chat, and we'll try to answer them live for the benefit of the entire audience.
Thank you for that. I think that was pretty comprehensive and insightful. So yeah, we have a couple of questions here. So Jason wants to know how the logs are stored to his SQL database.
Right. Thank you for the question, Jason. So I'm guessing you mean you want to monitor your SQL logs. I'm going to answer it either way, right? So if your question was to know how you'd like to monitor your SQL logs and where those logs are going to be stored, right? Most SIEM solutions will give you a flexibility in terms of which database you want to use to store the logs, right? Whether you want to do Postgres, whether you want to do SQL, you have the flexibility, and you have that with Log360 as well, right? You get the flexibility in deciding where you want, what database you want to store the logs in, right? If your question was how the logs are going to be collected from your SQL server, right? So if you want to monitor your own SQL database and you want to know how the logs are going to be collected, we've got agentless and agent-based mechanisms to collect logs, right? So depending on your requirement, you get the flexibility, and the same flexibility you're going to get with most leading SIEM solutions, right? You're going to get that flexibility both in terms of how you collect logs from your servers and also where you want to store your logs, right? And in addition to just storing the logs in the database, you can also archive the logs in a secure file server, right? So the logs get written into a timestamped and hashed in a designated file server to securely store your logs, right? So I hope that answers your question.
Here's another one from Gary. So does any solutions have a UBA built in?
Right, so we do. So Log360's AD Audit Plus module comes in with a built-in user behavior analytics component, right? So in fact, the screenshots that we saw in detecting an evolving insider threat was actually from AD Audit Plus, right? So this comes built in with the product, and there's no extra charge in using it. Right, so we've built these machine learning algorithms into the tool that can actually profile all your Active Directory users and detect anomalies in their behavior. Right, if they do something suspicious that they normally don't do, yes, our product can detect those anomalies and give you real-time alert notifications for that. So I hope that answers your question, Gary. So we've got. Oh, okay, so we've just got a few more questions coming in that we are answering in real time on the live chat. So in case your question hasn't been answered yet, just stick around for a few seconds and you should be getting the response on the live chat, right? So there's just way too many questions to answer out loud. In the meantime, if you want to explore the product, you can access our website, Log360 website, which has a whole bunch of material that would be useful in evaluating the tool. Apart from that, we'll be sending you a survey right after you close the webinar, right? So you'll get a survey. So take a moment to fill up the feedback form and let us know what you liked or didn't like about the session. And you'll also have the option to schedule a demo for ManageEngine Log360. So if this is something that you want to pursue, make sure you fill up the feedback form, and we'll contact you as soon as possible. Right. Apart from that, we'll also be sending you a bunch of resources via email within a day or two, and that material will be helpful not only in terms of giving you a knowledge share, but also material that will help you evaluate ManageEngine solutions. Right. So once again, thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar. I sincerely hope that this was useful information and you had a good takeaway from it. Right. So thank you so much for joining us, and have a great day ahead.